Paul, I'm going to hit you with let you answer this question. Then I have one last one that we'll wrap the session up with.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question. We'll cut that clip so I don't look ridiculous. That was my Joe Biden moment.
I was waiting. I was like, did I miss the question? Sorry.
Damn it. I think my face is red. I can see myself on screen. This is Paul Johnson with the New Frontiers. We're back with our panel today. We're going to talk about the debate, but we're going to take the debate kind of in a different direction. We're not only going to talk about the things that each of the candidates did right and wrong, but we're going to apply that to polling. We have a special pollster with us today, Paul Bentz, who's going to talk about what's happening in polling not only in Arizona, but across the country. It's a great discussion on politics. If you believe in what it is that we're doing and you like this show, press that subscribe button and let's get going.
Destiny. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
I'd like to welcome all my guests here on New Frontiers. I'd start with our columnist, Bob Robb. Bob, thanks for joining us. You up in Munns Park, Flagstaff today?
Still am, yes.
All right. And Henry, you did a great job last night with H.R. McMaster's. Also, he did a great job on the podcast, but I'd like to welcome you to our show as well.
Thanks, Paul. Good to see you this morning.
And then we have a special guest, somebody that I've worked with quite a bit, Paul Bentz. Paul owns a company called High Ground, and High Ground does a variety of different things in the political sphere, but one of them is polling. Now, today we are going to spend a lot of time talking about the debate, but I also want to try to connect that to polling and what is taking place. I get a lot of texts from people and a lot of questions from people that I speak to about, do polls even matter anymore? Are they accurate? Are they inaccurate? And Paul has a really good experience on that. In fact, he sent me a great article, I think it was by Pew, that had a great discussion on this. We'll put that up into the show notes so that people can see the discussion that we're having and maybe read more detail about it. But if I can, let's do this. Let's start. I'm going to cue this up by just playing a clip of the past debate, and then we'll have a discussion on that, and then we'll jump into polling.
I think Mr. Nixon is an effective leader of his party. The question before us is, which point of view and which party do we want to lead the United States?
Our disagreement is not about the goals for America, but only about the means to reach those goals.
Tell us his greatest weakness.
I would rather not critique the two candidates.
I think we ought to attack our country's problems, not attack each other.
I'm not going to talk about a difference of character.
I don't like to get into personal matters. As far as I'm concerned, this is a campaign about issue.
I agree with Senator Kennedy.
I find myself in so much agreement with Mr. Mondale.
I agree with Mr. Bush.
We certainly agree on it.
I'm going to give the president some credit.
First, I want to compliment the governor.
Let me pay a compliment to the president.
Okay. Better dialogue starts with each of us. So we all watched the debate. Did anybody see anything that looked like that at all in the current debate?
Absolutely not. There wasn't a kind word said about either candidate by the other one. Much the opposite.
The start, Paul. They shook hands. And they seemed to exchange maybe about half a dozen words, maybe of civil exchange there at the start. So you've got to give credit where credit's due.
Yeah. So do you think that is that just about Donald Trump, or do you think that we've entered into a new era in politics where people can't be civil to one another? Paul, you've done a lot of polling on different questions. Do you see there as being a greater conflict that exists within the public that maybe is being reflected in our candidates?
I certainly see an uptick in the divide and conquer mentality, the us versus them. Don't find any commonality with your enemy, attack and destroy them. And I think we saw that to an extreme level in the debate itself. I mean, former President Trump refused to even look at Harris. She looked at him on multiple occasions, often with derision, but she did look at him and address him. The former president refused to even look at her throughout the course. And I think that sort of speaks volumes of where we are in a political climate where it's not about trying to bring people together, but really take your base and hold on to it and then maybe grow a small segment in order to be victorious.
All right, so I'm going to use that as a bridge to talk about polling itself. So for me, from my standpoint, I've always been a believer that at the end of the day, this decision is going to be made in 6 to 7 states by a couple 100,000 people, and most of those are going to be independent or unaffiliated voters. But the argument also could be seen as, no, the real goal is drive up turnout on your base. Whoever base turns out at a higher level, if you can increase your base turnout by 4 or 5%, that's going to be the thing that helps you win the campaign. Well, Paul, when you do polling, there's lots of discussion about how inaccurate polls were in 2016 and then again in 2020. There's been some improvement in 2022. But how important is weighting in that process? And explain weighting to the public so they can understand how it actually does affect polling.
Well, first of all, polls get a bad rap because what we generally, when we talk about polls, what we're talking about is the horse race questions that we see publicized nationally that sort of see where the race is at any given moment, often perpetuated by the media, often sometimes put out by the party. So the first question you always have to ask is who is putting the data out? What is the benefit of that? Because there are partisan pollsters on both sides of the aisle that their goal is to make their candidate look good. There's another goal of polling, which is for fundraising purposes. If you show yourself ahead, it can motivate your base to donate more, or if you show yourself behind, it can motivate people to try to donate money to catch up. If you show yourself ahead, you can suppress your opponent, make them demoralized. I mean, there's a lot of goals that sort of give polling a bad name. So ultimately, what we're talking about is pure public opinion research, and horse race politics is a very, very small portion of it. In fact, most polling is done to understand messaging, issues, what segments may be movable, what are the things that they care about, how to talk to them. And so that's some of the stuff that we don't even see publicly. That's all what real polling is about. But when it comes to horse race polling, there's a couple of things to bear in mind. Number one, what audience are you talking to? So when you talk about 2016 or 2020, one of the things that we saw is nationally, we are trying to measure a presidential race that is done by an electoral college, by a state-by-state basis. And so they might have been more accurate on the popular vote, which is the whole country. But when you go into the state-by-state, that's really where, when you talk about, Paul, that there's only 6 or 7 states that will really determine this. It's the more local polling, the statewide, that is much more accurate than maybe just taking a blood pressure check of the entire country.
And when you look at 2016 and 2020, and most people, I think, would be surprised. No, actually, 2020 may have been more inaccurate than 2016, but by 2020, it was improving. What were the changes that were taking place in polling that made it degrade and that made it get better?
Well, a couple of things. First, certainly the proliferation of cell phones. Most folks got rid of their home phones. There's much fewer people that have landlines these days. A lot of the polling all the way back to 2016 was random digit dialing. It was push button polling. It was calling people at their homes because that's affordable. You can use a machine for that. You can actually robo-dial them and get a hold of people. It's the much more cheaper, affordable way of polling. To call a cell phone with the FCC requirements, you actually have to direct dial them. You have to call them individually. That's required by law. And a lot of the firms back in 16 and even into 20 were not as willing to do that. Most firms these days are direct dialing cell phones. In addition to that, as you know, as Apple and Google and everybody else get more tech savvy about blocking phone calls, it's finding ways around that, having clean phone numbers that will actually call people, getting past people who are screening their calls, but also implementing things like text polling, online polling, and other methodologies to try to reach out to audiences that may not otherwise pick up the telephone.
And in terms of audiences, if I get called for a poll, I don't answer it. In fact, if I get called by anything that doesn't show up on my caller ID, I don't answer it. I let it go to voicemail. It's just kind of my natural inclination. worry about the effect that may have on different types of audiences that aren't taking the phone call?
Absolutely. I mean, that's my biggest concern about things like online polling. To sign up for a panel and to be willing to take more than one panel, you are definitely of a higher efficacy, than the average voter. My goal is always to try to assess people where they are, and that's the biggest challenge, because a lot of folks, more than half of the electorate in Arizona, for example, do not participate in our primaries. In fact, about 60% of people who will show up in a general election do not show up in a primary. So they show up to the general election with not a great deal of knowledge. And so getting those folks to have an accurate representation of the electorate is a bit of a challenge. The other challenge is younger voters are incredibly unreliable. You cannot guarantee that they're going to show up in any given election. Certainly some candidates hope they do, and other candidates hope they do not. But trying to measure what level of anticipation or participation you expect among younger voters is where the art comes in. Polling is a lot of science. It's the quantitative portion of public opinion research, but you do have to measure a couple of things and set forth some goals or some weighting. For example, in Arizona, about a third of our electorates are Republican, about a third is Democrat, and about a third is independents. Republicans over-participate in every election. They significantly go more than a third. In fact, sometimes can be as high as 40% of our overall electorate. Democrats tend to participate right at their number, 32, 33%. Independent voters are the audience that is the hardest to judge, because they show up in the presidential elections, but they don't necessarily show up in the midterm elections. And getting them to participate at that same level, you just have to acknowledge that while you're looking at the data, some of those things are true. And so when we look at some of that national polling, the firms will come into a state like Arizona and they'll say, oh, registration's evenly divided by a third. So they'll set their quotas accordingly. And then that will overemphasize the influence of independents and underemphasize the influence of Republicans. And so you really have to look and see how they've set up the surveys to get you an accurate understanding of how realistic they are compared to what we're really seeing.
And in terms of what you're seeing nationally today, how would you gauge, when we see these poll of polls where they pull all the polls together and give us an average, how accurate would you believe those are in actually predicting how we're going to do in the Electoral College? And which ones do you follow?
I follow a couple of them. New York Times, Siena for sure. A lot of the ones that you see that come out on a regular basis. But what I'm following with those, Paul, is trends. What I'm looking for is a candidate trending upward? Are they trending downward? What's the average that we're looking at here? That overall performance. And right now they're pretty accurate because what they show is everything's a dead heat. What we're seeing is everything is so close and the margins are going to be so tight that sometimes we forget a margin of error. For example, in our polling that we did right after the primary, we showed Harris up by about 2 points in the state of Arizona. That, of course, was a little bit of a bump because she was new to the ticket. There's certainly enthusiasm there, but that's still within the margin of error. That means that Trump could be up by 2 points. And so we look at it and we take these numbers wholesale, that if a candidate's up by a point or if they're in the lead, that's naturally the assumption. But for the most part, you have to look at within the margin of error. In 2018, for example, I'll point out our final poll going into the general election for the United States Senate had Martha McSally up by 1 point over Kyrsten Sinema. But what we knew is that independent and younger voters were going to vote late. And we knew that the number of people that were going to turn in their ballots at that point, when you looked at the crosstabs of those margins, Sinema was winning those. So despite the fact that our poll showed McSally up by 1 point going into the general election, we said we believed that Sinema was going to win that race because while the data demonstrated one thing, the trends demonstrated something slightly different.
And when people talk about trend lines and how you need to judge how they're moving, when you judge how they're moving, my guess is they're not going to move in the same percentages they may have moved in the past if you saw some big jump. But the trend would still show that there'd be some upward movement for a candidate who had seen momentum. And if that, in fact, is the case, what would you project that we'd see after the debate?
So one of the biggest things that we're watching is these younger voters. It's no doubt, for example, that prior to Biden dropping out, Biden had been trailing Trump, and that there was a significant lack of enthusiasm among younger voters. Two septuagenarians going head to head was not something that was increasing a lot of enthusiasm among younger voters. But what we're seeing, for example, in the president of the United States is that Harris has in our latest polling, had about a 2-to-1 advantage over younger voters over Trump. If those folks decide to show up, that would be the difference. And things, debate adjacent, for example, Taylor Swift jumping in, and getting 300,000 voters to register state or countrywide. I mean, those little things can be a big difference among that segment. Younger voters are still much smaller. Over half of our electorate is over the age of 55 in the state of Arizona, for example. But if a candidate can win younger voter margins by a large number, the more of those that show up, the better. I would expect, and I haven't seen any data yet, but I would expect with the performance that we saw, that Harris would see a bit of a bump in support following the debate. I use my unscientific focus group. I talked to several older Republicans over the last few days following the debate, and without a doubt, every single one of them talked about how unfair the debate was, how the moderators were against Trump, and how it was a complete sham of a debate weighed against Trump, which is code for me that they think he lost. But so I think the younger voters will be much more solidified where they were. But you look at the commentary around it, you look at some of the social media, and you look at some of like the TikToks, for example, they all are really making hay out of it. So I expect among younger voters that will help her.
Yeah, it to me is very interesting to think about somebody who comes out and talks about there being people eating your pets out in your front lawn, and to expect the moderator to say, "Oh, well, thank you for that very good response. Now let's move on to foreign policy." I mean, of course, the moderator said something because it was so ridiculous, but I don't know. Maybe they were unfair. To me, I look at Trump and think he missed an incredible opportunity, and he could have accomplished a great deal regardless of the moderators.
Yeah. So on that point, and to Bob's article and some things that have been written, immigration is the number one issue in the state of Arizona. 78% of Republicans say immigration is their number one issue. When it came time for Trump to talk about immigration, he had mentioned it in the 3 questions beforehand. It was given the prime opportunity, the softball pitch, to make his statement about immigration. And she got him to talk about crowd sizes and eating household pets. It was a massive whiff on his part in a place that he could have been very effective. Our polling has for quite a long time shown immigration as the number one issue. It used to compete back and forth with education. Education has been down slightly, but immigration's held very solid. And it's something that he can be very effective in the state of Arizona, but he really missed on that one. That's one of his biggest missed opportunities.
Yeah. Now, Bob, you had just written a column about how Trump was missing the opportunity on immigration. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. And it wasn't just the fact that he got baited. He decided that his pitch on immigration to his biggest opportunity to reach swing voters in swing states, not the MAGA base, was to characterize illegal immigrants generally as hardened criminals who eat household pets, and that his solution was mass deportation. That might be something that jazzes up his base. It might be something that could be used in a turnout operation. But I think the views of swing voters in swing states, who are likely to determine the outcome of this presidential election, unless one side or the other has an unusual advantage in a turnout operation, doesn't see the immigration issue in those terms. I think describing it in that terms probably alienates them. On the other hand, Trump had a story to tell. The Obama administration and the Biden administration adopted an official policy of turning a blind eye to illegal presence as an immigration offense in the guise of setting up enforcement priorities. He reversed that policy that he inherited from Obama. He adopted some restrictions on the ability to get into the country. Border apprehensions declined. Biden comes in, he goes back to the old policy. He abandons some of the measures that Trump put in place, and border apprehensions soar. And it wasn't until it was clear that this was a potentially politically fatal problem for the Biden administration that there was even any discussion of taking significant executive branch action against it. Now, that's a story that I think would resonate with the swing voters, that Trump is someone who would take enforcing our immigration laws seriously. Obama didn't, Biden didn't, and Harris was unlikely to. But that's not what he said. He didn't say a single word comparable to that. It was, they're hardened criminals, they eat pets, we need to round them all up and ship them out. That's the wrong audience for that message.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because I probably fall into that category. You know, I'd like to see a merit-based system. I tend to believe that we need to enforce our borders. I think that that we shouldn't just have an open border system. And I have some criticisms for how Biden handled that. And it became even more clear when he attempted to fix it, to see, well, actually, some of those programs work. But by appealing to such an extreme, it's such a turnoff because it seems like it's someone who's willing to violate human rights that it dramatically loses me. Paul, in your experience on polling, do you see that that there is bipartisan support for border enforcement, both amongst Democrats and Republicans?
Absolutely. Border enforcement, number one, is incredibly popular across the board. You would be surprised to know that the Center for the Future of Arizona, as part of their Arizona Voters Agenda, discovered that there's actually a desire for comprehensive immigration reform. Something along the lines of the Gang of Eight proposal, even a majority of Republicans would support. And so that's one of the things that's sort of this disconnect. And Harris did point it out briefly that they tried to put together some sort of immigration reform proposal and that Trump was the one who picked up the phone and told people to reject it. I think there is an appetite for securing the border and for enforcing the laws, but for solving the problem. But to Bob's point, I think it's right. This mass deportation and some of these, it works incredibly great for the base, for the primary electorate, for the people that are cheering at his rallies. That's what they want to hear. But he's got to get out of rally mode. He's got to get away from the folks that are going to show up time after time and go into the broader audience. When we got out of the field with the poll and we published the results, I got a call from a gentleman. And he said, your poll shows that Harris is up by 2 points. How do you figure? And I said, well, I did a statewide survey. I called across I bounced it across, the region, Maricopa County, rural Arizona, age, party, gender, did a full scientific call, called 500 people. And he said, well, did you just call people in El Mirage? And I said, no, what are you talking about? And I said, no, we balanced it. And he goes, well, nobody I know is voting for Harris. And she's a disaster. And I said, well, he's got a broader audience that he needs to speak to. I'm talking to the entire state of Arizona, not just your folks. I'm talking to everybody. And he said, well, I don't know a single person. Have you seen his rallies? Look at how big his rallies are. And I said, sir, I would say that a lot of the same people go to those rallies over and over. It's the same kind of audience. How many rallies have you been to, sir? And he goes, well, that's not relevant. Don't worry about that. And so, when you kind of get into this echo chamber and you're talking to the same people over and over, you think everybody starts to feel that way. But you've got to get outside that box and see what the overall electorate's looking like. And that's where this is going to come down to. It's really a different strategy. It does seem like the Republicans are going to try to drive up the margins among their base, go to the areas where they do well, and instead of getting 80% of the vote, go get 90, right? But there's only so much in those areas that you can do. They did it in 2020. I mean, you look at Trump's stops in Arizona near the end of the race. He was going out to Mojave County. He's going out to Buckeye. He was going to the far Southeast Valley, deep red areas that he does incredibly well. Whereas Democrats were competing in some of the swing areas and going and talking to undecided voters. And it was successful by 10,000 votes, but it was still successful. I think we're seeing a rematch of that right now. I don't see any sort of change in strategy from that side.
You know, and it's interesting to me, in being a candidate and having been in office, you get a group of people around you, and you get a group of people who come to your events who either agree with you, or at least they agree with each other. And so you keep hearing the same thing over and over again. And you don't get a lot of people who will tell you, you're crazy on this. You're way off base. I did have one. His name was Elliot Pollack. Every time he would come in, he would tell me how crazy I was in terms of something we were doing economically. I think Bob did the same thing back then. But let's make a little shift here. And I'm going to ask this question first of Henry. This question is, if we're going to watch the clip, we won't watch it here, but the audience will see the clip where there was a transition that took place in the debate. For me, in the very first three questions, the debate actually was pretty good. It was going back and forth. In fact, I thought Harris lost the first question. I didn't think she won it. I thought she was kind of on her heels a bit. They were talking about issues, and they were going back and forth in a normal style. And then that piece of bait was put out where she made the comment about the size of his rallies.
Raised. And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you.
She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there, and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame. The people on television say my dog was taken and used for food.
I'm not taking this from
television. But the people on television saying their dog was eaten by the people that went there.
Again, the Springfield city manager says there's no evidence of that. Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond to the rest of what you've heard.
You talk about extreme.
When she made that comment, he immediately began to go back to saying, you know, my rally's small, your rallies are the ones that aren't big enough. And that was when he made the mistake of moving over to this concept of over exaggerating what's going on the immigration issue, which created it eclipsed everything else that he had said. Henry, you watched the debate. You watched, I suspect, that section. What was your takeaway from that?
My takeaway on the debate is perhaps a little different from everyone else's, because it was 6 p.m. and in the Thompson household, that's kind of getting the kids ready for bed. And so I watched the debate, but I watched it in the chaos of my living room with 2 kids running around and all that kind of stuff. And I would like to posit that I am a little closer to the median voter in my experience of the debate for that reason, because I was not passing every little statement. I didn't have time. I was watching a lot of the time and not able to hear a lot of the nuance. And I agree that this statement about them eating pets just is one of the only things that really jumps out at me as a big memorable moment from the debate. And I think that's going to be probably the only thing that anyone remembers from this. And so I think that Trump made a mistake in taking the bait, you know, and But I also think that too much is being made of that in the media and subsequently to the debate. I think a lot of people would have tuned in somewhat. They would have watched some highlights the next day. They maybe, like me, were watching but weren't able to pass every single little bit. And for long stretches of the debate, I think it was kind of as I was sort of anticipating it was. Trump was a little rambling. He would take the bait on certain issues and sort of exaggerate and do all that stuff that he always does. Harris was often also kind of rambling and making statements that seemed sort of prepackaged and pre-prepared and not particularly authentic in a way. And so for me, it really was about what I was expecting. And the few moments that jumped out as perhaps newsworthy or shaping my overall impression were, yes, the moment about eating cats. And that was kind of it. So my question maybe for Paul is, how representative of people's experiences am I, and how much attention are normal people really able to pay to the nuances of the debate and kind of the points keeping that seems to be going on among a lot of pundits?
Well, I think it's very emblematic. I think one of the biggest things to see is what does Saturday Night Live do with this debate this weekend? If they're live, I don't know if they're live or not, but if they how do they characterize it will actually probably have as much of an impact in the zeitgeist than the actual debate itself. I think most people are like you, probably followed it, maybe loosely saw some of the clips, maybe didn't see. I mean, you're 100% right. Harris's answers were often canned. I heard her radio commercial like 3 or 4 times the next day after the debate, and I was blown away by how almost identical the script from the radio commercial was to what she said during the debate.
I had the same experience with seeing some of the TV commercials that I'd seen during the Olympics for the Harris campaign. She used exactly the same language in the debate too, which I was really struck by that as well.
And she was very evasive on a couple of questions, particularly, I think her initial posit on abortion was very good. I think Trump's response to abortion about killing infants really sort of put him on a spot where he wasn't able to come back because they pushed her on 7, 8, 9, and she didn't really answer, but he had put himself in such a position that he couldn't really press her on it either. So it's not that she had some stellar performance, but I think what he didn't do is capitalize on the opportunities he was given. And I think the biggest one was the closing. When you're in a debate, the best thing you want is to have the final word. You want to be the person that ends the debate and gets the last statement. And it's your opportunity to talk about what you want to talk about and also ask people for their vote, right? The biggest thing you can always do is ask someone for their vote. Instead of doing that, what he did is he ended with a statement about how Biden's the worst president ever, she's the worst vice president ever, and they're the worst. And that's where he ended it. And that's, if that's what he wanted to leave resounding in people's ears, that's what he did. But it didn't really make the case that he was the right candidate for the job.
Yeah. So in my household, Henry, the way we do it, literally, my mom passed away this year, so we didn't have her. But usually there are about 25 to 30 people who are brothers and sisters in my mom's living room. She would have this big wooden spoon, and we'd watch the debate. And of course, my family, there are Trump people there, Harris people there. I mean, there are Democrats and Republicans. She'll walk around and smack you on the head with her spoon if you start to get out of control, because they'll start fighting or arguing or whatever. This year we had to kind of monitor ourselves a little bit, but we watch every word. It's been a kind of a Johnson tradition. Elliot, you watched the debate. I'm interested in 2 things from you, and certainly your overall opinion of the debate, but you can't help but be an economist. And so you're watching things from an economic point of view. I'd love to have kind of your input into what value you might have gleaned from the debate from an economist standpoint.
Let me just, as overall the debate, now you got to understand that I think Harris's economic policies don't border on insanity. They're way over the border. She is creating a situation, if she implemented all that stuff, that would result in a declining standard of living in the United States. And that is horrific. However, I think that Trump was simply terrible. He was, and last time, our last group meeting, you said that no, Harris, basically this is hers to win or lose. No, it turned out that it was Trump. He was terribly unprepared. Some of his statements were idiotic, just idiotic. And he passed on so many opportunities to say, look, here's all the problems we have. She is connected with every one of them. She is not the solution. She is the problem. She is the instigator of the things that you're unhappy with now. He never did that. He let her get away with saying, hey, I'm brand new. I changed every one of my opinions in the past 60 days, but I'm not responsible for anything I said before. So, again, I was flabbergasted at what a terrible job he did, is the only way I can put it. I don't believe he paints himself into corners he can't get out of. You mentioned the abortion issue. It's a state issue now. Basically, he should have glanced over it. It's down at the state. Go speak to your state legislator. The bit about eating cats and dogs, even if it was true, which I doubt it is, why would you bring it up in this context at this point in time? It's insanity. And the bit about whose rallies are better or bigger, who cares? I mean, it was utter stupidity. And he focused on nonsense instead of focusing on, look, she's the problem. Here's what she said before. Now she's changing her tune. And by the way, if the other thing he apparently doesn't know, when economists government economists take a look at what programs are going to do, they do a static analysis. In other words, they don't assume that there's going to be any change in people's habits, spending, things like that because of the tax changes. So all those numbers are nonsense. You remember when Reagan the supply side economics, this is going to be terrible. They're going to be huge deficits, blah, blah, blah. And it ended up being this huge boom, and people paid more in taxes than they otherwise would have because there were dynamic changes in people's spending habits and when people took capital gains and so on. And the same thing would happen under Trump. I don't believe any of those numbers at all. But he also painted himself in a corner with tariffs. 10 to 20% increase in tariffs is insanity. All he should have said is we're going to increase tariffs on those countries that are being supported by those industries in those countries that are being supported by their government, so it's unfair competition. People understand unfair competition. That's all he had to say, but he didn't. It was horrible. Now, as far as Harris is concerned, I got to give it to her. She was well prepared. She knew every platitude in the books, and she kept on hitting him over and over again. And he missed every opportunity, and there were dozens to beat the crap out of her, excuse the expression. But he didn't. He was so unprepared, I was shocked. And so I don't know if that answers your question, Paul, but neither economic program thrills me to death. But the reality of Trump's is a lot better than the reality of Harris's, in my opinion.
That is definitely reminiscent of the Elliot that I knew back in 1992 when the savings and loan crash happened, and I said that I was going to try to fix the economy, and you sat there and yelled at me about what an idiot I was, that Mayor wasn't going to fix the economy. But in any event...
Well, I think it was Barry who was yelling at you, but that's all right. Yeah.
You're sure. All right, Bob, I want to... I know you and I both have had one of our thresholds with Trump was just what happened on January 6th. What surprised me, we'll play the clip here.
On January 6th, you told your supporters to march to the Capitol. You said you would be right there with them. The country and the world saw what played out at the Capitol that day, the officers coming under attack. Aides in the West Wing say you watched it unfold on television off the Oval Office. You did send out tweets, but it was more than 2 hours before you sent out that video message telling your supporters to go home. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day?
You just said a thing that isn't covered. Peacefully and patriotically, I said during my speech, not later on. Peacefully and patriotically. And nobody on the other side was killed. Ashley Babbitt was shot by an out-of-control police officer that should have never, ever shot her. It's a disgrace. But we didn't do this group of people that have been treated so badly. I ask, what about all the people that are pouring into our country and killing people that she allowed to pour in? She was the border czar, remember that. She was the border czar. She doesn't want to be called the border czar because she's embarrassed by the border. In fact, she said...
We're watching it unfold on television. It's a very simple question as we move forward toward another election. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day? Yes or no?
I had nothing to do with that other than they asked me to make a speech. I showed up for a speech. I said, I think it's going to be big. I went to Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington, D.C., and the mayor put it back in writing, as you know. I said, you know, this is going to be a very big rally or whatever you want to call it. And again, it wasn't done by me. It was done by others. I said, I'd like to give you 10,000 National Guard or soldiers. They rejected me. Nancy Pelosi rejected me.
What surprised me was two things that he did. One was, I actually thought that he was making some movement by saying, I lost the race, by a smidgen, which he had said sometime before. He backtracked on that and said, I was just being facetious, it wasn't real. And then he seemed to go into a full-throated defense of what happened on January 6th. I'd love your thoughts on that.
What we got, what the audience got, was the full Trump. If he gets elected president, the American people can't say that they didn't know what they were buying, because the full Trump was on display. And there's no more emblematic example than the one that you just cited, which was simultaneously trying to deflect blame from himself for those events, while justifying those events and suggesting that to the extent there was any excesses, it was directed at the insurrectionists rather than the people beating the crap out of cops. It was a disturbing moment to me. The fact that this is a dead heat when he is embracing the events and celebrating the events of January 6th and denying that they were a direct knock-on effect of his attempt to institute a coup by staying in office when he had lost the election.
Yeah, you know, we had H.R. Masters on our program the other day, and as I said, Henry put together an event, and one of the comments that he had made that I just found to be interesting is, you know, how everything is taken to an extent. You know, that he just can't live within the normal means of saying, hey, here's the problem. He has to overextend it. But in this particular case, it just, in this particular case, it just seems to be something that he's going to be challenged by. And again, I've said in the past, I think if he wanted to get over it, he would just simply move to saying, yeah, hey, that went further than I thought it should have gone. I didn't support what they did. He wouldn't be a supporter of them, and he'd try to distance himself at least a little bit. But in that debate, he was tying himself to it. Paul, any comment that you might have on that? Because here's what I find to be interesting about that, is it seems to me becoming normalized. While I know Bob and I, that's a bright line for us, I don't know that that's a bright line for most people in the public anymore. Any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I mean, the further we get away from it, the less it's sort of top of mind for voters and something that they think about. I will say that he also dipped his toe back into election denialism, as you mentioned, that he didn't lose the election and refused to say that, that was in jest. I think that's problematic for him. We have seen election denialism in 2022 as a loser for the MAGA candidates. And so for them to continue to revisit that and relitigate that is a mistake on their part. And to the thing you said, Paul, someone said this the other day, I'd like to find one thing that Trump finds just okay. You know, everything is either the greatest thing in the world or it's the worst thing in the world. Is there anything in his sphere, in his universe, that he thinks is just okay or just all right? I mean, he just deals with these extremes on both sides that, you know, he either had the greatest economy in the world or the Biden administration has created the worst economy in the world. I mean, there's like that sort of level of extremism is very difficult for people to sort of wrap their arms around. And then he doesn't successfully play both sides. Back to January 6th, you know, trying to blame the police for the death of the individual is not a good look for him. I don't think, especially when she pointed out the number of officers that were injured, she definitely got the upper hand on that. And the same thing when it came to the military leaders, when he talked about the military leaders who've chosen not to support him. And then he comes back with, well, I fired all of them because they were all terrible. I mean, that just doesn't, I think, jive with the undecided voter, the folks that, it plays really well with his base, but I don't think regular folks see that and say, well, you picked these people. These are the people you wanted, and then they don't agree with you, so now they're all terrible. I just don't know if most people deal with it that way.
So let's make just a little bit of a shift on this. Bob, you had spoken about in one of your columns that you thought that Harris was going about it incorrectly by trying to goad him. You said this before the debate, by the way, and the column had more nuances than that. In the end, do you think that was, the appropriate way to approach it? But here's what I'd really like to have as a question from you. If she wasn't facing Trump, if she were facing a normal candidate in thinking about her comments, what are the areas of the debate that you thought that she didn't do as well? So far, this has been kind of a one-sided discussion that says that Trump really lost the debate and Harris seemed to do either okay or well. But what would be the areas of that debate that you would think that, again, with a normal candidate may have been problematic for her?
I thought that emphasizing trying to bait Trump might detract from what I thought was the primary thing that she needed to try to accomplish in the debate, which is to cross the credibility and acceptability threshold for the swing voters in the swing states, many of whom are high efficacy voters. We've talked about marginal voters and whether they turn out. There's a cadre of people who regularly vote who are swing voters. They sometimes go for a Republican, they sometimes go for a Democrat. And I thought that should be her prime objective. And I thought that emphasizing trying to bait Trump might detract from that. As it turned out, that wasn't the case. She was able to do both very adroitly. And I think for the swing voters that I'm describing, she in that debate passed the credibility threshold, that she presented herself as a plausible president and commander-in-chief. I don't think she succeeded necessarily in crossing the acceptability threshold. And it was her failure to provide a rationale, a persuasive rationale, that she is no longer the crazy California liberal that ran for the presidency just 3 years ago. She is stuck with all of the big spending programs that the Biden administration has adopted. She's, to the extent she's been specific on policy, it's more big spending proposals and more government regulation of the economy. So I think that she still has places that she needs to go in order to consolidate a decisive advantage among high efficacy swing voters who I think will remain suspicious that they may be buying a pig in a poke if they go with her. On the other hand, Trump doing the full Trump, I think accentuated concerns among that group about a second term for him, far more than she left doubts on the table.
Yeah, Donald Trump definitely made the job easier for her sale. Each of them came into this with an objective. And my guess is the people working for Trump thought that his objective needed to be to show the public that this wasn't about Donald Trump, that this was about them, and that they had been harmed during the Biden administration, and that he cared about them, and that he had policies that he could put into place that would be helpful to them. I think the aspiration her campaign should have had is to make her look presidential. I think she succeeded in hers. I think he failed in his. But I also believe that, as you had put so well, Bob, that she didn't do a great job of getting over that threshold of telling us, who would she be? Why is it that we should be excited about her campaign? Now, she did for the pro-life or pro-choice community. I think the pro-choice community would have looked at that. She was passionate in those comments. She did very well in those comments. I agree with those comments, but that's not the only thing that I vote on. There are other issues that determine how I'm going to vote as well. And there are some people who are turned off by those comments because they're in the pro-life community. My view of it is areas that she messed up in, and I'll give you the two that I thought were the most glaring. The first one was the first question. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And I did not see that case being made. And I think that she should have made that case to some degree so that people at least had some things to hang their hat on that said, okay, here's why we're better off. Now, arguably, you could watch Trump's demeanor and say, that's why we're better off today than we were 4 years ago. We don't have that demeanor. So maybe that ended up being a default answer. But to me, the second big question that Kamala failed on in that is trying to define why has she changed her position. And to me, there's an easy answer to that. I don't know that she believes this, so maybe that's not the reason that she would have done it, but it's to try and connect that to the idea of this country is very, very divided. And if she has to change some of her positions to pull this country together, it's a worthwhile thing to do. We're not going to all be able to sit there and hold on to every position we have and hold this country together. We're going to have to make some compromises. We're going to have to find common ground. I think fracking it was the right idea anyway. But in Pennsylvania, they deeply believe it's the right idea. Point is, I don't know why she gave up on her environmental issue on that, but to me, the right answer to it is to find common ground, to try to find a way to pull this country together. Because at the end of the day, if you want to pay for social programs, you have to have an economy that works.
I think that what I was looking for was simply an overall feeling. Which one of these people is explaining things so the average person could understand? She hit so many times on Trump's faults and his inability to cure those faults, and that she was the person to do it. Whether she ever succeeds in anything or not, she probably convinced a lot of people, especially relative to Trump, that maybe she is the person. Maybe we have to give this person a look because she sounds more reasonable. Trump never forced her to explain any of her positions. She got away with murder as far as I was concerned because she just was, just lying on a bunch of these points, and including her first statement about whatever it is, something 25, whatever they call that thing that Trump has disavowed. She came across as much more reasonable, and that's the feeling I had walking away. Trump came across as, is this guy kidding? I think the thing was much more black and white than you guys are making out.
The problem or the illness of the patient, the American body politic or the American economy, had kind of already been diagnosed. You only have to take one glance at the opinion polls to see immigration and the economy, especially inflation, are way out ahead of any other issue. So the problem already was there. I think, to give Trump some credit, he tried to push that problem onto Biden and Harris. He tried to reinforce the diagnosis of the problem. When he was effective, he was able to do that. His language was hyperbolic. He often exaggerates and says strange things. That's true. Harris, I don't think, ever actually proposed or articulated a solution to the problem. And I would posit that the reason she didn't is because she doesn't have one. I think that she is associated in part and parcel with Biden's policies that have led to all this inflation. I don't think that her priorities in her worldview and her view of society and the economy allow her actually to solve the problems of inflation and immigration. She hinted at some things. She wants some more border enforcement. She'd like to give people more money to buy houses. And then she even came up with, during the debate, there was something new like a small tax credit for small businesses. But I don't see those as solutions to the problem. So I think that if we're going to say why this wasn't the decisive victory for Harris at the end of the day that it may have been in terms of, points scored against one another, I don't think it was a decisive victory for her with the public because she didn't actually tell them how she was going to solve the problem. Trump kept bringing up this problem. It's the worst economy ever. It's the worst administration ever. And that's his way of saying people are really angry about the economy and inflation. She never actually said, okay, this is what I'm going to do to solve those problems in a convincing or clear, articulate way. So I think that's basically why this is still a toss-up. And I suspect it's going to be still a toss-up in another 2 weeks when we've got enough polling data that's come out. Paul, maybe I'm wrong. I'd be interested to hear what you say. Because I think that a lot of the stuff that was going on was extraneous to the actual problem and what people were actually listening for. So that's my impression of the debate, is that there are a lot of missed opportunities. There's a lot of points scored back and forth on issues that weren't really central or on personality that not really what people were listening for. People know what the problem is. They wanted to hear a solution. And I don't think that Harris really gave one despite being able to put Trump back on his heels so much.
Yes. And as Elliot had said a moment ago, it definitely is more black and white. I'm interested always in the nuances, but at the end of the day, when people walk away from that debate, I think it was just a clear Harris win and a clear Trump loss. And I would argue Trump lost it much more so than Harris won it, other than her baiting him. The answer on Afghanistan, I thought he had a point on Afghanistan, and I think she missed an opportunity. The opportunity for her on that is to say, we had two people who wanted to pull out of Afghanistan, and the way that we did it, when we did it, I watched, I observed it, I was there, and I saw some mistakes, and those are mistakes that I'd like to correct in the future. She doesn't have to take accountability for everything that Joe Biden did. She can create a little bit of distance, and I saw a reluctance in her to do that.
To your point, I think the first question she didn't answer very well, and that's something that Trump could have come back to on multiple occasions. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? She didn't have a good answer for that. I thought her first answer on abortion, the more emotional response, telling the narrative around abortion, was very effective. But when she was pressed on the 7, 8, 9 months, and forced to answer when she refused to answer those questions, I think there was an opportunity there to Trump jump on that he really missed, that she didn't do as well. In the first couple of questions, she tried to say we have plans, and she tried to kind of give some data and details. It came across very technical at first, and I think she sort of abandoned that when she saw it wasn't working. And so she kind of went to sort of the broader style, the more platitudes based on sort of the campaign talking points. To Henry's point, I do feel like she appeared a little rehearsed. She was trying to be optimistic. She was trying to be hopeful. She was trying to bring people together, but she was using clearly the poll tested, focus group tested language that they had used. The reason why debates are boring is because they don't answer the questions, they answer the things they want to get forth. She was really dead set that she was going to deliver the talking points that were ahead of them. I think she did well on a couple of points, pointing out sort of Trump's legal problems, criminal problems, and then also the people that have left him behind. But she really dropped the ball when he started talking about the dictator that supports him, how he thinks he's great. She never really picked up on that. She could have definitely used that against him and pointed out this is the type of individual that praises Trump, whereas, she could have articulated how she was going to work with the world leaders and says that they're all laughing at you, because then he said, no, they're laughing at you. And it sort of became this tit for tat that I think didn't really work to her advantage. I think there's a couple of occasions where she tried more of the emotional plea to folks, and I don't necessarily know that worked as well. She had a little bit of emotion in her voice, and I think that's probably made her a little bit more personable than Trump, who was clearly angry, refused to look at her. But I don't know if she needed as much of that. But I think it's more of, as everybody has said here, it was more of he lost this more than she won it. I think she had an average performance. I think there's a lot of Republicans that could have, if she was up against there's a large number of Republicans that could have done really well against her team.
Yeah, I imagine that debate with Nikki Haley versus her, and think about how different that would have been. She did have an opportunity to talk about, and she did a little bit about NATO and about her support for them, but that's a Nikki Haley voter, somebody who believes in a strong national defense. So here's my last question for the panel. This debate may or may not determine who wins the election. One thing that we learned in the shooting with Donald Trump a month ago is that 2 weeks later, people don't remember, right? They move on. This debate's not going to be remembered much 2 weeks from now. People will move on from it, and it will be whatever the next issue is. I've always been worried about, for both sides, an October surprise. And candidly, we all look back, while, I think it's very fair to argue that Trump may not, or probably did not have any involvement in what happened in Russia. That doesn't mean that Putin wasn't involved in going on what was happening here. He clearly disseminated information and did things to try to be harmful. As you might remember, the hacking into the DNC issue that he released on the day that Trump had the issue with the recording where he was coming out talking about grabbing a woman by her genitals. Point that I'm giving is I would not be at all surprised to see that Putin doesn't do something, and he doesn't do something extreme. And I don't know what that extreme means, but it's probably something in Ukraine which may be beyond the pale of what we would imagine. So this race isn't over, and there will be events that will take place nationally, internationally, and locally that will have an effect on this race that more than likely will mean this debate is forgotten by the time we get around to the election, other than a feel for it. But really, my question is this. My assumption of regardless who wins, I look at Arizona as an example. Now, this is my take, and this is why I'm going to make you the first one to answer this, Paul. My take is that Arizona is not really a purple state. I think that we're a red state, albeit for Donald Trump. If it were not for Donald Trump, I think Arizona is more of a red state. I don't think that Ruben Gallego would be having a great chance unless he was facing somebody like Carrie Lake. And I think Carrie Lake is a protege of Donald Trump. She has recognized the tools that he's used to be able to motivate his base, and she is attempting to do the same thing. I think if you had a normal set of Republican candidates, it would be much more difficult for Democrats to be successful. And in fact, I think many Democrats recognize the advantage that Donald Trump gives to them in being in the election. That's my question for you, Paul, is if we're going to have to figure out at the end of this campaign, one side's going to win, one side's going to lose, and the loser is going to have to go back and figure out what their lessons are. What do they do to try to make it better? Do you believe that Donald Trump has a down ballot effect? And do you believe that without him, Arizona might be more of a red state?
Yes, I think Arizona remains a red state. When you look down ballot for the clerk of the court or for the county assessor in Maricopa County, Maricopa County is this alleged purple county, but when you look down ballot, they vote Republican. You look at Kimberly Yee overwhelmingly winning the state treasurer position. Arizona defaults to Republican candidates. The challenge that you have is that these MAGA candidates do not fare well. And you said they're going to have to go back to the drawing board and see where their problems are. Well, they've been given this opportunity multiple times following 2020. They were given this opportunity in 2022 and didn't learn their lesson. They're given this opportunity in 2024 and haven't learned their lesson. I mean, Donald Trump's getting about 80% of Republicans right now, probably 85 if we pick the undecideds, but there's about 15% drop off. Carrie Lake's only getting 75% of Republicans. If you're not Donald Trump, but you're a MAGA Republican, your crossover appeal it flags among Republicans. It also flags among independents. Ruben Gallego is up by 10 points over Carrie Lake because he's winning independents almost 54% to 27%. I mean, like, he's winning them by 20 points because she's not Donald Trump. There's this aura about him. He's whether it's they believe he's a successful businessman, or he tells it like it is, or he's going to drain the swamp. That level, even though she was a local celebrity, she just doesn't have the same lift that he has. And no MAGA candidate does. But the problem is this primary electorate really is narrowing further and further down around these candidates. And so they win these primaries and then they're shocked that they can't win these general elections. But yes, I mean, I think if it were Nikki Haley versus Trump or somebody else, or Nikki Haley versus Harris or somebody else, I think they do incredibly well in this state because we are still a red state that care about the economy if somebody can articulate it, that care about immigration if somebody can articulate it. It was only 14 years ago, in 2010, Republicans won every statewide office and won 2/3 of both legislative bodies talking about immigration because independent and unaffiliated voters were on their side on an immigration issue. Republicans have the skills to do that. But I mean, you look at these local races, there's a guy in LD 15 who has residency issues, and it was brought up by another Republican. A Republican was willing to, from the Freedom Caucus, to sacrifice potentially their own control of the state legislature to kick somebody out that they don't agree with. When you have that level of purity that you require among your own Republicans, that you're willing to sacrifice other Republicans for the righteousness of your cause, that's a problem. And I'm not sure that even if they get defeated in this election, that they're willing to take a stern look in the mirror and make that admission.
Did Democrats have a chance in the legislative races this year?
I think they have a chance to split the legislature. There's this assumption that they're going to hold on to a couple of seats in competitive districts that they've held on to, but 2 incumbents dropped out. And so now they've got to get another non-incumbent Democrat to win those. That's a much higher bar to achieve. I think the biggest outcome that they probably could achieve at this point is likely splitting one of the legislative bodies.
Okay. All right, Henry, any last comment, and certainly any comment on what's going on in Arizona?
I agree with everything that Paul said, actually. I think that it's going to be a really interesting post-election phase here in Arizona. It would be particularly interesting if Trump won narrowly and Lake lost by a margin that, because she would then be sort of checkmated, she would not be able to contest the election results because of Trump's victory, and yet she would have to therefore accept her loss. Or at least it would be very interesting to see how she would respond to that situation. So I think it's going to be an interesting post-election moment for sure, almost regardless of whether Trump wins or loses, especially on the Republican side. I don't know as much about the Democratic side. Maybe you could say some things about that, Paul, but it seems on the Republican side, the question of Trump versus post-Trump is starting to loom pretty large over state politics.
I agree with you. It's still a red state. It's less of a red state because even though we're getting a lot of Californians who fled California in their policies, they bring their basic underlying Democratic leanings with them. But I believe it's still a red state. What's happening, though, is we all know that line from broadcast news, that movie, it's 20, 30 years old at this point. Yeah, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. I got to tell you, that's the way I feel about these things, and I don't know where to go. I almost hope that Trump loses so the Republicans can get back to some normal level and perhaps present a candidate 4 years from now who isn't batshit crazy.
All right, Bob, you've been watching politics on this for a long time. We've had discussions about it. Not only do I want to know your opinion on, do you think that Arizona is primarily a red state, but if Trump loses, do you think that there is any chance of the Republican Party coming back to normalcy?
I think that the extent to which Arizona was a red state has been exaggerated. We had Bruce Babbitt as governor. We had Janet Napolitano as governor in the 2000s. Republican registration didn't begin to exceed Democratic registration in the state until the mid-1980s. So you had a period, and Paul identified the high point of it, of Republican dominance in the early 2010s. And in 2012, for the first time in the state's history, 100 years, there was not a single Democratic statewide elected candidate. But up to that point in time, there had been. So I think that the way to describe it, and Paul described it as the default, and I think that's correct, a normal Republican running against a normal Democrat, the Republican is going to win. But if you've got a weak Republican candidate, there's a chance in this state that, and even a non-MAGA candidate, some of this occurred before the MAGA dominance, you have the opportunity for Democrats to win. I always cite the Ducey Cinema voters in 2018. There were 225,000 Arizona voters who voted for Doug Ducey for governor and Kirsten Sinema for U.S. Senate. That's the group that holds control, particularly in statewide elections in Arizona now. And that number is probably larger now than it was then. And I think they would generally prefer a Doug Ducey type of Republican. But even Martha Sally, who got tagged as a MAGA Republican, in part because she didn't shuck it or try to create an independent image, wasn't even more acceptable than the Democrat. So I think we are lean Republican, but still a swing state. I don't see, and I hope I'm wrong about this, the opportunity, even after a shellacking, for the Arizona Republican Party to have some self-evaluation and become a party in which people like John McCain, John Kyle, Doug Ducey can win Republican primaries. I don't think any of the three of them could win a Republican primary in Arizona today. And I don't know if even after a shellacking, that the Republican electorate would be willing to go back to selecting those kind of nominees rather than the losers that they've consistently selected for the last 3 election cycles.
All right. I said last comment, but I'm actually going to give it to Paul, both in saying thank you for being here, but also Bob raises this big question. If they don't move, the answer is the independent movement is going to grow even bigger in Arizona, in my mind, because there are a number of Republicans left over who just simply do not want to be a part of what they see going on the MAGA right. You're involved in the open primary issue. Give us just a little bit of an update on that and what you've seen on polling, and then we'll close this out.
Sure. I think one of the biggest things is, left to its own devices, independent voters are the fastest growing group in the state of Arizona and will be, once again, the largest group in the state. They were the largest group going into the presidential preference election, but as you know, independents aren't allowed to vote in a presidential preference election. And so we did see a pretty significant shift of votes combined with cleaning up the rolls that now Republicans are once again the largest registered group in the state. But short of a paid registration effort by either party, what we see is most folks that come to the state and start to register generally register as independent voters. And so what we see is they're not treated fairly in the system. That's what the open primaries are about, is treating independents fairly and giving them an opportunity to vote in any election because they are the taxpayers who pay for those. One might argue that independents can vote in our primaries right now, but if you wanted to vote in the Democratic primary for Congressional District 1 and then in the Republican primary for the county recorder, you are not able to do that because you're basically forced to choose one aisle or the other. So at the moment, we are at the argumentation stage, challenging signatures. And what we've seen is the state Supreme Court, throughout 80 years of precedent, to allow this challenge to go on beyond the printing of the ballots. Traditionally, printing of the ballots was the deadline in which everything needed to be resolved, whether an issue was going to be or not going to be on the ballot. They remanded it to the Superior Court to review the actual signatures. The problem is the duplication of signatures. That's what the random sample is about. A random sample goes through and determines the number of signatures that are incorrect, that are duplicates, and it extrapolates throughout. But what we're also doing now is they've suggested that there's an additional number of duplicates outside of that, but it comes to double counting. If you walked into a room of people and took a random sample and said, this number of folks have green eyes, and then you said, okay, that's the number for the room, but then you actually sent someone into the room and counted up everybody in the room that had green eyes, you would come out with double. Great news. You've got this many people with green eyes. You started with 100 people with green eyes. Now it's 200 people. That's what the double counting is looking at right now. So it's expected to be resolved in the next week or two, but that's sort of the challenge and where it lies right now. From a polling perspective, it's overwhelmingly popular. What we see is that people want to treat independents fairly. They'd like to have competition. It's in the high 50% range, despite the fact that we know there's 30% of the electorate that won't vote for it no matter what. So it's polling very well. If it is on the ballot, it has a strong likelihood of passing.
Awesome. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We appreciate you being on the show. We'll be back in another week.
Thank you.
And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of unknown opportunities and perils. It holds out the promise of more sacrifice instead of more security. The new frontier is here.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.